Ladies and gentlemen, today we gotta talk about the feet goddess herself, you know who. And I gotta tell you, I've been loving this character. I played her at S0 R1 for, I believe, a couple of days. Then I took her to S2. I played her a little bit longer. And then I decided to go balls deep into Yuno, go all the way down to the base of the shaft, and get her at S6 R5. And I gotta tell you, she is hands down one of the craziest characters in the game. Y'all know me maybe as the Brand Glazer. I loved everything that Brand brought to the table. This dude was an absolute menace. He was a support, a shielder, a healer, a DPS, and ever since then, every other sub DPS or support that they've dropped, I've been expecting something like Brand, and we really haven't had it. Lupa is just weird. Lupa is kind of in there. You could S6 R5 her, she's still kind of mid, bro. But when it comes to Yuno, I gotta be honest, this character is an absolute monster. At S0 R1 or at S6 R5, she is a beast. So today we're gonna take a look at this video by Tunda, and it's titled, Is Yuno Actually That Good? We haven't even started the video. I'm gonna tell you, yes, she's actually that freaking good. Whether you're you and I was rocking her on Moonlit. We haven't even let the video start. I was rocking her on Moonlit. She is such a good support for any team that you slaughter in, because not only does she bring her buffing capabilities into the table, but she also has very, very solid damage and heals. But yo, enough of me yapping. Let's hop onto the video.
And I believe that I can now fully form my thoughts on her, which I'm going to be discussing in today's video. First, I'm talking about her performance in Tower, then her performance within Whimpering Wastes, and then finally I'll talk about the points I made in my pros and cons video to see if I was right about her or not, starting with Tower. Tower is actually the game mode where I feel that while it is Yuno's best game mode, it's the one I feel like she has the least impact in, which we're gonna discuss a bit more when we get to the Whimpering Wastes section.
That's crazy, because Yuno in Tower is actually insane. I've seen teams of S0 R1 Yuno as the main DPS of the team clearing tower stages with no problem. Keep in mind, she is running with her best comp, whether it's Siakona SK or Jiangxing SK. She's still clearing towers. So that's actually very interesting. I'm guessing her performance in Whimpering Waste is even better, and I do gotta keep it real with y'all. I haven't tested my Yuno in Whimpering Waste. I've only tested her in Tower and in Hologram, so pretty damn interesting to hear that.
Obviously, Yuno is meant to be good with Augusta. That much is obvious. We kinda knew that from the Blessing of the One Light effect alone. But the thing is, Augusta was already an incredibly powerful character for Tau of Adversity.
Yeah.
And while Yuno is an upgrade over Morphe, I still don't believe that she is big enough of an upgrade to really justify getting her for meta purposes only.
Okay, so I'm gonna drop my take on that, because so I did my own comparisons, right, from Yuno and Morphe, right, with Augusta. There's a big difference that people don't like to consider when they talk about this particular thing. And like you guys know, I like testing a lot. I like testing a lot to see what really matters. And this is one thing that you guys got to understand. If you're gauging Yuno's value versus Morphe with the direct damage that Augusta does, yes, the increase is not that big, right? If you're gauging if you should get Yuno for your Augusta directly by gauging her damage in comparison to the damage she does with Morphe on the team, it's not that big of a deal. But the reality of it is that while one, she will do more damage with Yuno on the team, she's also bringing a lot of damage of her own. Yuno is bringing quite a good amount of damage, pretty damn solid, to the Augusta comp. She's also bringing heals into the team, which is also one of those things that you gotta count. So the way I see it is, if you're running Augusta and Morphe, you're running a hyper carry top heavy team where, you know, you set up your SK, you set up your Morphe, and then you go into Augusta and you do your thing. If you're running Augusta with Yuno, now you have another source of outputting damage, which is Yuno. And then on top of that, you also have the buffs that are going to increase your Augusta to do more damage than the Morphe comp. and then you're also going to have the heal. So you can't just look at it from the point of view of how much damage does my Augusta do, right? Because while the increase is not that big, when you look at team damage comparisons and overall how they play together, I do notice the difference with Yuno Augusta versus Yuno Morphe. That's one thing you guys got to keep in mind.
Morphe Augusta is still an incredibly good combination.
That's absolutely true, though. Morphe Augusta is still an absolutely bonkers combination. Like, Morphe Augusta is super smooth. Another thing that I want to throw in there, since we're talking about Morphe and Augusta, I feel that the rotations with Morphe and Augusta are quicker and per se easier and smoother than with Yuno, because, well, with Morphe, you're just going in there. Morphe is a very easy character to play. You're kind of just doing your thing to buff Augusta and you're getting out. Whether with Yuno, you want to take advantage of her gameplay, deal damage with her entire rotation, and then move on to Augusta. That's the difference between them. Simplicity with Morphe, a little bit more complexity with Yuno, but a lot more benefits as well.
And yeah, sure, Yuno is better, but is being better really enough to justify that amount of pulls? We're going to be talking about it a bit more later on, but I'm just trying to tell you why I believe that Yuno is not a very impactful character when it comes to tower. Well, at least when it comes to Augusta, because unlike other sub-DPS characters, Yuno is actually pretty good with multiple carries.
Yes.
She works pretty decently with Zani, where she is a downgrade over Spectre Rover and Shorekeeper, but still a pretty good option. She also works well with Phoebe, basically being around the same ballpark as all the other teams, like for example the Shikona and the Morphe teams. The character that I have seen pretty good improvements on is GN. GN is now a character that feels more competitive, but he's still not top tier.
Okay, but see, the thing is, there's two things. One thing that just caught my attention, which was the S Rover, you know, getting brought up in there for the Spectral Frazzle comps, or the heavy character comps like Peebs and Zani. The thing is, Spectral Rover, once again, I don't think really compares to Yuno with what Yuno brings to the table. Yuno's damage is pretty damn big and quick as well. And it could just be a me thing. You guys can go ahead and roast me in the comments. I don't like Rover's gameplay all too much. At least not when you compare, like, Rovers to, you know, the opposite character. So, like, in this case, like he said, S Rover to Yuno. I would much rather have Yuno on my team on a Zani comp, for example, than S Rover. S Rover to me feels like playing with a bag of bricks as opposed to Yuno on like a Zani, or maybe even a PB comp. So there's that. And then when it comes to Gion, Yuno does make him a bit better, but I think in that comp it's even less worth it getting Yuno for Gion if you already have your Morphe build, because Yuno kind of becomes the main DPS of that team. Your Gion might still do maybe more damage because you still have the Morphe in there, but in all reality, Gion's current best team from what I'm hearing and seeing is Gion, Siakona, and Yuno. And at that point, I think it's a toss-up between Yuno and Gion. It's like a duo type of DPS type of team. It's weird.
Which, you know, makes sense. Also, Yuno doesn't really solve GN's major issue. GN's primary issue in tower for quite some time now has been bosses, and the fact
Gion's main damage in tower is the fact that bosses are now more mobile, and Gion doesn't have a way to gap close, and he relies heavily on that liberation burst and that liberation mode to deal all his damage. And if he's in that mode and one of these bosses fucking flies up in the air or jumps halfway across the map, you lose half of your damage. So that's Gion's biggest problem, mobility and being able to gap close between these bosses.
that GN, a lot of the time, just can't consistently hit them. There's a lot of bosses that just run away from you at times, or go into the air, and GN can't deal with that.
Yep.
While Yuno does have ranged abilities, which means she's able to hit enemies while they're in the air, this still doesn't solve the issue with GN. The reason that Yuno is good with GN is also not exactly because of buffing GN, because in fact she buffs GN less than Morphe does. It's more so because her personal damage is so stupidly high that—
Bro, this exactly Exactly what I've been saying. Exactly what I've been saying this whole time. Yep.
GN really gets to piggyback off of Yuno's success.
Yeah.
So it really feels like GN is kind of being wheelchaired through his problems. But that's beside the point. DPS Yuno is also actually really solid in tower. It's among some of the better teams if you ask me. Sure, it's no top tier team, but, well, it is actually pretty good. I can clear the tower pretty easily with the Yuno DPS team, which is very nice to see. A lot of sub DPSs suffer from the issue that they feel way too tied to their DPS unit's relevancy in order to actually be relevant themselves. But
yeah. Okay, so this goes back to kind of what I was saying with Lupa. Ever since Brent, I've been waiting for other characters because you can slot Brent on many teams and he'll still do good. Even teams that don't rely on fusion or skill damage, he can quick swap pretty good. He can offer his own damage. He has the shields. He has the heals. So he does really good. When I look at characters like maybe Lupa or even something worse than that, Roshia, they're extremely tied to their characters. And outside of that, you don't really use them unless you like the character. I love Lupa's design. She has my favorite like summon animation. She's great looking, everything. But she feels like outside of rocking her on my mono fusion team, there's not a lot of teams that I'd personally, like currently at least, want to use her on, and much less Rocha, right? Rocha's going to be getting used with what, like Camellia and Frolova, and that's it. So when it comes to Yuno, you really feel that even though she does have that blessing of the Wand Light that ties her directly with Augusta, they're pretty much scissoring all the time with how close that buff is directly tied to Augusta. She's still a very viable independent unit that you can slot into any team, bro, even teams that are not necessarily like heavy attacking teams, because she brings that much into the table. You can build around her, you can slot her into some teams just to have an extra damage dealer in there, or you can slot her in with, you know, her ideal partner, which is Augusta.
I see Yuno being able to avoid this fate, which is very nice for her. And that brings us to Whimpering Wastes,
Okay.
where while I do believe Yuno is less good in Whimpering Wastes compared to Tower, she has a lot more impact in this mode if you ask me, especially when you give her her signature weapon. The thing that makes
that's a confusing take. She's not as good, but she has more impact. Okay.
Yuno stand out in Whimpering Wastes is that, unlike Morphe, Yuno is able to wipe out waves of enemies during her field time.
Yeah.
This is actually incredibly important. One of the biggest deals for Whimpering Wastes.
Oh, we're comparing her impact versus Morphe's impact. Oh, okay, yeah, then that makes sense. I thought we were just comparing her impact as a standalone unit, or, you know, a unit that can be slotted into multiple teams. Yeah. If we're comparing her versus Morphe's just freaking trash. Like, Morphe hits like a wet noodle, bro. You can build that dude like a whole DPS, and you'll hit like 2 wet noodles. So, okay, I understand what he meant by that now, in that sense.
Is having consistent damage output.
Yeah.
The more time you're wasting on a support whose damage on the field isn't that high, the less waves you get to wipe. And ultimately, in Whimpering Wastes, the #1 priority is wiping as many waves as possible.
Yeah.
Morphe doesn't really wipe that many waves on his own, with a lot of his damage coming from his coordinate attacks, which are during Augusta's field time.
That Bumbleclot could barely wipe 1 wave. What are we talking about?
But with Yuno, that's not really an issue. Her damage is basically only when she herself is on the field, which means that while you're playing Yuno, you're constantly wiping out waves, especially with your Liberation.
Yeah.
This leads to massive buffs and scores for Augusta, and it makes me very confident that Augusta is now one of the best DPSs for Whimpering Wastes, assuming you have Yuno. Much like
That's a funny take, right? Considering how many people were mad about Augusta's Liberation time freeze because it would be wasted if the waves weren't like the same enemies popping up right after each other. And I gotta agree with him. Augusta is absolutely insane in Whimpering Wastes. She's pretty damn good. Yeah, she doesn't compare to like freaking what's her face, Frolova, but she's still pretty damn solid.
What I said during the tower segment, Yuno is also good in multiple other teams in Whimpering Wastes. And it's for very similar reasons as with the Augusta team, being the fact that, well, Yuno gets to do a lot of damage to waves of enemies while you are playing her. For example, a team of Phoebe, Yuno, and Shakona will probably do better than a Shakona Shorekeeper team, because during Shorekeeper's field time, there's really not that much that's happening damage-wise. Zani is a bit of a different story, because if you're good enough at Quick Swap, you're able to exploit Zani's very long animations to apply more frazzle in the middle of your Zani rotation. But most people aren't going for this.
Yeah, I was about to say, most people really don't want to do that.
So again, Yuno seems to be a very good option for these characters because she has a lot of personal damage, which allows her to wipe waves of her own. Sure, in some teams she'll be a bit more of an awkward fit than others, but that's just kind of the price you pay for a character that works with multiple other characters.
And not only that, that's really how all the characters work. There are people that make weird comps and get things going, but there's just units that will be better fitted to run with others. That's pretty damn normal. Yeah.
You're not really seeing anyone play GACHA out of a Carlotta or a Jinchi team anymore, but Yuno has way more flexibility in this regard. As for Yuno DPS in Whimpering Wastes, I wasn't that impressed. It is pretty decent, don't get me wrong here, but I personally don't believe that the character is that good for Whimpering Wastes if you're trying to DPS her. A lot of her damage is centered in her Liberation's nuke, which can wipe waves. But here's the thing, in the DPS rotation, you're using it right after Arc Beyond the Edge, which puts you very high up into the air. If you use your Liberation too early, you could just straight up entirely miss your Liberation. And considering just how much damage it does, this can be very negative for your overall clear score. Yuno DPS is pretty decent in Whimpering.
I could see how that is a real thing, but at the same time, I feel that Yuno DPS with Whimpering Wastes, you could still do a lot of damage because of the way her kit works. And on top of that, you could pair her up with other characters that have been per se falling behind, right? So if you pair her up with like a Gion, you have two very solid sources of damage from these two characters. So maybe if he's referring strictly to main DPS and building a team around her, like, I don't know, like a Sia Kona, like an SK or something, then I could see where he's coming from. But if we're talking about her performance in a team that is kind of optimized to do Whimpering Wastes content, I think that she would actually perform pretty damn well.
Wastes, but I'm not gonna go out of my way and call it some kind of insane team, because that would be a lie. It's just decent. And that brings me to the points I made in my pros and cons video, starting with Yuno's incredibly high damage output. I think this one speaks for itself. It's very true. Yuno basically throws almost every single sub DPS under the water when it comes to damage output. Her Liberation alone might just deal more than half of the damage that your Phoebe in Confession mode is doing. And that
Phoebe in Confession mode is a whole nother wet noodle, bro. I hate Confession Phoebe, especially when you run her with Zani. You run Confession mode Peebs normally, she deals more damage. You run Confession mode Peebs with Zani, you're a wet noodle, bro. Because for those of you that don't know, she actually gets a part of her weapon buff nerfed when she rocks with Zani in Confession mode, or in any mode when she's hitting targets with Spectral Fragile, because it instantly gets turned to the other thing. So yeah, that's true. This character as a sub DPS or a support is absolutely insane. And I think the only character you could really compare her to would be Brent. And even then, I would really have to test out numbers. But I do think that as a main DPS, like if you're using her as a main DPS and you're using Brent as a main DPS, I have this feeling that she does more damage than Brent, but it's relatively close. But I do think she has a better way to bring out that damage, because Brent is more of a, you set up that anchor, you drop the anchor, you're back down to like very little damage, whereas she's constantly dealing damage from a lot of her kit, bro.
That is with only Shorekeeper buffs. Yuno's damage output is just kind of ridiculously high.
Yeah.
I think that no one can really deny that when it comes to sub DPS characters, Yuno and Brant are the top dogs.
Yeah, there you go.
That should—
Bro, I like when I do videos like this and I react to people's videos, and oftentimes, because I like to pause before they keep going into the video to speak my mind, And I like when I say things that I personally have tested or have seen from, you know, my testing or other people's testing that I get to see live, like from my Discord. And then they, you know, I hit play and they say those exact things. Because I feel that they're not big brain takes. I feel that I'm not out here being like, oh, this guy's so smart. He says something that I feel that they're just basic takes that anybody with two brain cells can see if they play the game. And a lot of times people really don't see things like this. Like you really have to break it down and make entire discussions about these type of topics. So it really is that way. Brent and Yuno are the absolute peak of Wuthering Waves when it comes to sub DPS supports. I think this is really good. SK is a whole nother scenario because she's not a sub DPS. She's just purely support.
Be pretty obvious by the fact that they both have main DPS teams, while other sub DPSs don't really do that.
Yeah.
Other than Phoebe, but she has an entirely dedicated mode for it.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, I said that Yuno works with plenty of DPS characters, which, if you've been paying attention to this video, is very true. Augusta, GN, Phoebe, and Zani are all DPSs that she works with, which is more than most sub-DPSs can say, especially since with most of these sub-DPSs, some of the synergies start to get a little bit iffy, where only one part of the kit really synergizes with the DPS, while the rest just kind of exists. So yeah, I think it's pretty easy to say that Yuno has a pretty varied team selection.
Yeah.
I also said that she can be a main DPS herself, which, again, I've talked about this in a video. Her main DPS team is pretty decent. It's actually pretty good in tower, and in Whimpering Wastes, it should be good enough to clear. So yeah, again, that's true. I also said that she is capable of healing teammates, which, I mean, yeah, that's just in her kit.
Yeah.
You can't really deny that. I didn't really notice the healing myself, but that's because I personally don't get hit much. I'm very sure that...
Homie said, hey, I didn't even notice the healing because I don't got skill issues. That's crazy. Homie said he built different.
Someone who is less good at dodging and gets hit more appreciates this healing quite a lot. But then in the negatives. I said that for one of the negatives that while Yuno is better than Morphe in most of Morphe's teams, is it really worth the cost? And this...
I'm gonna be honest, I think that in most scenarios, it is worth the cost. Because if we're directly comparing Yuno to Morphe, and we just want to be flat out, you know, clear as day about what we gotta say, it's this simple. She provides better buffs. She deals more damage. She heals. And she has better gameplay mechanics. Like movement, range, flight, pretty much. So, if we count all of those things alone, as a standalone character, yes, she's better than Morphe in almost every scenario. If not in every single scenario. Now, if you're on an absolute budget, you're wondering if you should get your, you know, Yuno for characters like, I don't know, Augusta, characters like Gion, for example. I would say yes, because for Augusta, straight up improvement, right? And even if it's a small improvement in direct damage increase, it's a bigger improvement in overall team damage increase. If we're also talking about Gion, if you're trying to give your Gion more longevity, while the buffs from your Morphe might still give him more damage, your overall team damage with Yuno is also going to be bigger. So I don't really see a specific scenario where comparing Morphe versus Yuno would be bad for Yuno. So if that's the scenario, Yuno wins in every single category, pretty much.
One is really case-by-case dependent. There's not really any one answer.
Yeah, and like Jay just said, even if you're not trying to get her for your Augusta, the fact that you can build her as a standalone main DPS, the fact that you could go around and pair her up with maybe your Siakona, pair her up with your Jiang Xing, that's, you know, she's a 1.0 standard banner character, and all of a sudden she becomes a very solid main DPS, gives her that much more value, more longevity, more diversity for your account. Maybe you need a specific extra character to clear some floors in tower. You can't really do that with Morphe unless it's like the, you know, the easy floors. But Yuno can flat out become a main DPS. So I don't even think it's fair to compare Morphe to Yuno. Morphe is an amazing character. He's done us a lot of service this whole time, and he can still be an amazing character that will still get your Augusta to do great damage. He will still get your Gion to do great damage, but in every freaking basic aspect, Yuno is always going to be the better option.
That is correct for everyone. Yuno can be worth it if you have multiple heavy attack based characters, where one of them gets Morphe and the other one gets Yuno. Yuno can also be a main DPS, which Morphe can't do. So
Yeah.
I think it's unfair to say that you shouldn't pull for Yuno just because Morphe is goated.
Yeah.
But it also wouldn't be fair to say that Yuno is worth pulling even though Morphe exists. It's very case by case dependent. And then
Okay, you can say it's very case by case, but in all reality, in every aspect, she is better.
I also said that Yuno had a pretty long rotation, which, while it is true, I didn't really notice much of it.
So I think, once again, he's comparing her rotation to Morphe. That's why I said yes. If you just look at Yuno's overall rotation, is not a very long rotation. It's just like a normal rotation, right? But if you compare her with Morphe, who goes into the stage, does like 2 things and outros, then by that comparison, it is a very long rotation, because with Yuno, you're actually trying to do stuff. You're trying to, get off your skills and your liberation and your damage and all of that. Whereas with Morphe, you're not.
Yuno's rotation is definitely longer than characters like Morphe, and feels more in the ballpark of characters like Brant when it comes to how long her rotation takes.
Well, yeah, once again, another character that you want to be doing damage with. You want to take advantage of that rotation. It's not just about the buffs, but taking advantage of the damage they can bring during said rotation. So it just makes sense.
Sometimes a bit shorter than him. But I feel that her very large personal damage really makes up for this.
Yeah.
Just like with Brant, they are both on the longer side when it comes to their rotation time, but they make up for it with very large damage output. But that's just my opinion on Yuno. Let me know what you think in the comments down below.
All right, that was a solid video, man. Honestly, I think there was a lot of really good takes on the video. There's a lot of caveats to it that I hope that with my explanation, it brought a little bit more light to some of the things he was saying. Not that anything he was saying that I could heavily disagree with or even disagree, I think. But a lot of times people don't really get the full picture unless you explain it to them like they were toddlers. But yeah, that's going to be it for me, guys. I do think Yuno is an absolute monster of a character. Y'all know how much I love Brant. I've tested Brant at S0R1 in almost every facet of content in the game. I tested him in holograms. I literally went through almost all the holograms with just Brant, and then the ones that got a little harder, I paired him up with the level 50 Sanhua, and I was doing everything. I paired him up with Sanhua in Tower, and I also did solo Brant in Tower, and at the time, I cleared all 3 sides with a solo S0R1 Brant, and he was a beast. And ever since then, I've been waiting for a character that I could tell you guys feels just like this. A character that could be slotted into the ideal team composition, a character that can be slotted into other teams as secondary options, and a character that can be built around and made into a main DPS and have comparable damage to other main DPS characters. Maybe not as good as dedicated main DPSs, but somewhere up there, and Yuno is definitely one of those characters. So whether you want her for everything she can offer your Augusta, or anything she can offer us a heavy attack buffer, or simply because she has some yummy and delicious toast, not what I said, what some of you say, by all means, I do think she is actually that good. But that's going to be it, guys. If you've enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe, join our Discord, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.